What's going on? So I'd like to start off and apologize that the video schedule still isn't consistent. We will get better with a more persistent upload schedule. We're shooting for every other day. As you saw in the first video, my Samsung S10 Plus is a great quality phone. However, it does not like the heat and decides to randomly turn off once the internal temperatures get too high. So what I'm actually shooting this on that I picked up the other day is a small little action camera, like a GoPro, not a GoPro. It's like a quarter price of the GoPro. And so I'd like to see a comparison between quality of the phone versus the action camera. So I can put the little action camera in the head strap, and then I can go ahead and focus on that way. I can use both hands. I don't have to worry about moving around a tripod constantly, and we can actually get some better shots just because tripods don't always like to fit everywhere. I know the first two videos, or the actual entire process of lowering the truck, was rather lacking on the instructional portion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain everything that I did, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and create a spec sheet for all of the bolts, the nuts, all the sizes, everything you need to do what I did. So starting off on day one, we started on the passenger side front, just because in the engine bay it's the easiest to take your intake out and then access that shock tower and whatnot. So it's got 3 bolts around the top of the shock tower. If you're going to do what I did and run shock tower deletes, you don't even have to worry about the bolt connecting the shock tower to the actual shock. So you get those unbolted, and then it'll decompress up into your engine bay. And then in the first video, I actually I zoomed in with the tripod on where the bottom mounting bolt is. So then you go ahead and you undo that bolt, and you can pull the entire assembly out through your engine bay. So one thing that I do need to mention, it took incredibly long, was 4 out of the 6 shocks, the polyurethane bushing was completely gone. It must have deteriorated and fallen to pieces over the years. I couldn't tell you. I haven't messed with the suspension of the truck since I bought it about 5 years ago. So I guess without driving with a bushing, the metal sleeve that sits on the outside of the bolt had gotten pounded over and over and over again by the weight of the truck decompressing the spring and whatnot, and that actually started to freeze that sleeve to the bolt. So I actually had to go in with a hammer and chisel several times to get that freed up in order to pull everything out. So what we did was we left the vehicle under load, then we put spring compressors on the passenger side spring. Then that way, once you jack it up, you didn't have to fight against the spring's decompressing power in order to get it compressed again in order to pull them out. So if you get them tight enough initially, once you jack it up, it'll be compressed enough so you can pull it straight out. So we pulled it out, and I cut off an entire coil because I only wanted to drop the truck about 2 inches. I didn't want to really go any lower than that and risk any potential clearance issues on the bottom. So 2 inches was a noticeable yet safe drop distance, and in my opinion. I talked to a couple other people. Darren was one that seriously advised it because he had done it before and had no issues. Regardless, we put the first coil back in. We dropped down, just trying to see where everything sat. I'd only dropped it down about 1/2 inch, which I was pretty surprised, but I guess it makes sense with a variable rate spring. So we pulled it back out, and I went ahead and cut off another 1/2 coil, and then we put it back in and dropped it down, and it dropped it down to right above 2 inches just because the driver's side was not done yet. So we said that sat good, let's do the driver's side, drop it down, see where everything sits. So we next pulled the driver's side coil. We just immediately went straight and cut the coil in 1/2 off. We did our best to match it to the amount taken from the passenger side. And then we put that in, we dropped it in, and that was the end of day one. So it sat about 2 inches lower, from 41.5 to 39.5 inches. We really liked that, so we left it there. So then on day 2, we actually, we knew we were going to do the rear, but we had some other ideas, so we jumped up under there. We didn't know exactly how much it was going to drop in the rear, and last thing we wanted is for it to shove the drive shaft into the output shaft seal. So what we did was we went ahead and dropped the drive shaft out of it. I figured while it's out, we can also probably service the T-case because I haven't done that before. So I figured I'd kill 2 birds, 1 stone, as well as if I have to make any modifications to the drive shaft, it'll be easier out than trying to pull it out once it's already too big. So we pulled the drive shaft. We went ahead, we took off the traction bars because it was a pain in the butt to try and keep getting up and underneath the truck with the traction bars on. We then undid the U-bolts from back traction bar mount to the axle, pulled those out. Then we pulled the top little helper spring off that sat on top of probably a 1-inch spacer in order to get to the main leaf pack. We thought we were going to have to pull everything, which I'm glad we didn't now, because after closer inspection, the driver's side leaf spring pack has a bolt that runs right into the fuel tank. So that would have been a nightmare, and I have to drop the fuel tank just to get one bolt out, just to get the leaf pack out. Regardless, we pulled the one spring, helper spring off the top and a little 1-inch spacer, and Darren actually advised me, he says, well, if you're free from the traction bar mounts and you're free from everything else, he goes, you can jack up the rear and just pull that 5-inch factory block out. It's like, all right, well, it's sitting at 43.5 inches, and we need to get it to 39.5 in order to match the ride height of the front. So I figured, why shouldn't we be able to pull a 5-inch block and replace it with the 1-inch block that we had pulled from underneath the helper spring? So that's what we did. We dropped it down, and ironically enough, the back is now sitting between 39.5 and 39 5/8, as best as we can eyeball it without getting too technical. So the ride height's great. I think it's sitting really, really well. It's lower. It looks better in my opinion. It should help performance-wise. In the rear, you've got just the 4 bolts on the bottom of, well, my traction bar mounts, but it should be the same no matter what, because you've got U-bolts that go over the leaf pack, and it's got to secure it to the axle somehow. The drive shaft was pretty simple. It was 4 8mm nuts that hold down the straps on the outside of the U-joint. Oh, and that's another thing. We figured once we pulled the drive shaft, we'd go ahead and replace both U-joints and throw that in a video too. So then with all 4 corners of the truck sitting at 39.5, we measured for the correct length shocks, since we knew we were going to be getting some custom QA1s done. So initially the front had 2 shocks on each side, but after talking with Steve over at QA1, I asked if there was any benefit whatsoever to leave the additional shock up front, and he said he couldn't think of any. I was also at that same conclusion. We don't really need to worry about weight transfer very much with some of the shocks, like the QA1 racing shocks. They're made for weight transfer, so it helps some of the cars. Regardless, we're going to be launching in 4-wheel drive, so I wasn't concerned about that. So I figured we would go ahead and we'd pull the additional shock mount, and that would A, drop some weight, B, save some money on QA1 shocks because they are at the top of their line. I've talked to numerous people that have serious drag trucks, and they all recommend QA1. So I figured, well, I don't want to put in cheap shocks and then have to replace them 2 years down the road when I want a more serious setup. I figured we'd just go ahead and drop the truck and do it all at once. So we went and we got all the measurements for the QA1s. Kevin over at Full Send Diesel is actually who I'm ordering all these through. If you're not, he's going to be down in the link. I know I tag him in pretty much all of my updates on Instagram, which is also down in the link, or not down in the link, but it's down in the description below. So we've got those ordered. Since I'm still running the OEM coil springs, I got the non-coilover dual adjustable shock for the front. So it's completely rebuildable, valving and whatnot, and internal components in case something were to ever happen. It's got both adjustability. It controls if I'm not mistaken, it controls your compression rate and your rebound rate, so that once you do take it to the strip and you start seeing what you can do, you can actually adjust it on all 4 corners depending on how it's transferring weight. So we got the non-coilovers in the front, and the rear we actually did get coilovers with a 14-inch spring. We've also got a spanner so we can adjust the height of the coilovers in case we wanted to squat a little bit better or sit a little bit higher off the line. Regardless, that was all going to be ordered. I've also got full send diesel shock tower delete plates, which, if I'm not mistaken, I'm kind of hoping I'm the first, but Kevin is just now creating those via one of his buddies who's got a CNC. So he is actually going to be making his own shock tower delete plates, sort of like Felice has got, but at a fraction of the price. And I'm excited to run those. It's definitely going to free up some engine bay space. Next, Kevin's he ran out of hats and stickers pretty quick, so he's actually got some more on order. So I'm going to be getting a hat because I got to rep the sponsor, right? One of the sponsors. So the stickers are actually going to go on the truck. I've got a couple different ideas. A lot of people like to put them on the rear windows. I prefer to I want to start lining them up from the bottom to the top of the rear quarter panel right behind the wheels. I think that looks pretty sleek, especially if we can get all white stickers. So far, I've gotten all white stickers, so we're lucky in that department. That way, I can showcase who I prefer to run and bring more recognition to them. So Kevin, full send diesel again, and Mishimoto. Everybody's heard of Mishimoto. But Kevin is actually an up-and-coming diesel performance shop in Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is always good to hear because that's a small town right outside. It's probably 30 minutes north of where I was born and raised. My mom works in Jacksonville and has for like 30 years. So that's really close to home. So anything I can do to help support Kevin in the growth of small businesses, I always try and do. But other than that, that's pretty much the update on. I know it's the brief version of actually dropping the truck, seeing how it took 3 days. But it really wasn't hard. Best thing I can do is, it always helps if you have a second pair of hands, which is why I had Carl, as well as oversight, because I knew once I started cutting, there was no going back without buying OEM stuff. So next, I actually just got off the phone not too long ago with, I've got a guy right up the road who's does powder coating, so I'm not going to spoil it and tell everybody what's getting powder coated, but the color that is on the truck now was technically Psycho Brass. It was not laid correctly, according to this powder coat guy. He said that they rushed it. The top coat was uneven, which is why it caused discoloration, and then it actually started to spider web and crack because it hadn't cured long enough in the oven. I've got quite a few things that are going to be getting dropped off at powder coat shortly. In the next video, I've got to clean the garage. It's atrocious right now. So I've got to clean the garage. I've got to measure for new custom length U-bolts. I just don't want any play whatsoever, especially when we're making some real power and launching. I want to be able to hold all the power that I possibly can in the rear. Other than that, stick around. I know there's still quite a bit of stuff to be done now that we're sort of through the main lifting of the project. It's going to be waiting on the parts to get in. I've got a lot of little things I can do. I have still got a valve cover in, the catch can lines to make and put on, so there's still plenty of stuff to do. But the big project stuff is currently ordered. Definitely stick around. Darren's got the governor springs and the valve springs that he's going to be throwing in that he got from Kevin. We both appreciate it. We're still growing. We'll continue to post more frequently. We appreciate your guys' support. If you guys could subscribe if you haven't already, make sure you give the video a like. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, drop a comment down in the section below.